So I've been a teacher for over 20 years. In all that time, there is no question that the way that people learn the best at anything is not by hearing about it, not by talking about it, not by reading about it, but by doing it. One of the best things that happened to me growing up was getting into cards, because what I learned is supply and demand, business skills, like, buy low, sell high, how to care for nice things. The life skills that I learned were incredible. One of the best things that any parent could do for a young person, in my opinion, is find them a hobby, a healthy hobby that occupies their time, that is good for them, gets their mind working, and that they can learn valuable life skills. For me and many others, it was collecting cards, where we learned all of these economics, all of these business skills, all of these social skills. So if I had a child, a son or a daughter that was into cards, I would promote the heck out of it, because so much can be learned by actually doing it. I love economics. I am an economics nerd. I have read books on economics for my free time. In college, I took electives on economics, like literally multiple electives that I took were economics. I like this stuff. And I think one of the reasons I like it is because of sports cards in my background doing that. Check out this video. We're going to walk through the supply and demand and how that applies to sports cards. And I'm going to take different situations and questions that people have asked and use supply and demand charts to be able to explain what's happening, why prices are where they are, and why some things will just never be worth a ton and other things are going to continue to skyrocket. The better we understand supply and demand, the better we're going to be able to predict the future on what happens with any sort of investment, including sports cards. Check this out. Leave me a message. This one took me a while to put together, so I really hope you like it. All right, so here we go. The economics of sports cards explained by me. Now, I'm going to show you a bunch of different examples, but as part of this, we have to just understand the foundations of supply and demand. And there are going to be parts of this you're going to go, this is a little dry, man. I mean, like, what are we doing? But I really believe that if we understand supply and demand, it will pay off, because the better we understand a lot of how this works, the better we're going to be able to predict what's going to happen in the card market, which ultimately we don't want to be buying things that are going to have issues. We want to be buying things that have a strong foundation. So let's just take a regular old card. We got a 1960 Yogi Berra. It recently sold for $151. Again, it's ungraded, pretty decent condition there. $150 ungraded. And why did it sell for $150? It really boils down to a handful of things. And one of those things is right there in front of us. The price is determined by the demand curve, is part of it. And after the demand curve, it's the supply curve. So we have a demand curve and we have a supply curve. Now, those lines represent how much people want to buy these items and how many will be produced of these items at the different price values. So if a card is really expensive, there are not going to be very many that people want to buy. Well, where the demand curve and the supply curve meet, there's a point there. The point where those two cross, it's called the equilibrium point. And the equilibrium point is that yellow dot in front of you. And if you take that line from the equilibrium point over, that's the price at which something sells. So that point on the price line is the sale price of any item. So we have all the supply of all the 1960 Yogi Berras and all the demand of all the 1960 Yogi Berras. And where those two cross is what things sell for. So that's sort of the foundation. So what's the deal with the junk wax era? That's such a common question. Like, it's eventually going to be worth a lot of money, right, when it's really old. Just because something's old doesn't make it valuable. Again, it goes back to supply and demand. So let's take Ozzie Smith. So in 1987 Topps Ozzie Smith. I mean, this guy is a Hall of Famer. One of the best defensive players of all time. His card sold for 20 cents with free shipping. And it had 4 bids. So to sell this and ship it to someone, they lost money. So literally this card had negative value. So what happened is in the mid to late 80s and early 90s, they were producing the heck out of cards. There were so many cards being produced that you could just buy. They were everywhere. So the demand curve that we just talked about with the Yogi Berra, and then the supply curve like we just talked about with the Yogi Berra, that's just the average demand and supply of a regular card of, say, a Hall of Famer. And that's how we determined the price with the Yogi Berra. Well, something happened during the junk wax era, during the late 80s, is they started making so many cards. The supply of them went through the roof. So the supply of cards went up, which meaning the quantity went up. So the supply line moved substantially. So no longer was the card of a Hall of Fame player worth what it was, because the supply was so high, the equilibrium point was much lower, the price was much lower, and still remains lower because there's so many 1987 Topps cards, for example, still out there. So there was a drop in value of cards because the supply went up. As long as the supply is high of this, and the supply is much higher than the demand, the price is going to be pretty low. So, will an 87 Topps Ozzie Smith someday worth money? Be worth decent money? Well, there are a few things that could make it be worth decent money, but the first thing that would have to happen is a lot of them would have to disappear. A lot of them would have to get thrown away or fall off the face of the earth for them to start having some value. But there are some things that could affect values of junk wax cards. There are some junk wax cards that will have some value and do have some value. So will they always be worth very little? No. Not all junk wax era cards will be worth 20 cents. So let's look at a Barry Bonds. Now, this is a Barry Bonds rookie card. Now, he has the 86 update, but this is his, 87 Topps, his first regular set, regular base card. And it recently sold for $2.75, which is more than the Ozzie Smith, right? So will this card ever be worth more than $2.75? Well, I think it's going to start to go up. Now, again, this is the junk wax supply curve. Remember, it's way down there because there's such a huge supply. So will this Barry Bonds card ever be worth, say, $10 or $20? Well, it could. One thing that could make it go up in value is if the demand goes up. Will more people want a Barry Bonds card? So one of the things that's starting to happen is a lot of the junk wax collectors have come back into the hobby, and what they want to do is they want to own cards from when they were a kid. Because they're starting to come back into the hobby, there's a chance that the demand is going to go up for a Barry Bonds card. Now, will it make it worth $200? Probably not, because the supply is so high. But a few more people coming back into the hobby, wanting to collect the cards from their childhood, could make it go up a little. But if the supply is still through the roof, it's never going to be worth that much. But you'll notice where the increased demand is, if those junk waxers start wanting that card, is it could go up in value with the demand going up. What if he makes the Hall of Fame? Would that make his demand go up? So there are things that can make the value go up. But again, the key point here is the supply is so high that even if the demand goes up a little bit, it's not going to make the card value go up that much, as you can see on that chart. So if you wanted to get into junk wax era cards, so you're a junk wax era person, you're getting back in there and you go, I want to buy some junk wax cards. What are the ones that are going to have and do have the most value? Well, let's look here. We have an 87 Topps Tiffany traded Greg Maddox rookie card. And it's not graded. So we have a few things. We've got our junk wax supply curve. We've got our demand curve. And there's a few things with this particular card. First, this is a card that is an update set, not the base set. The update set is far more rare than the base set. Another thing about this card is Greg Maddox is still pretty popular. He didn't have any, steroid stuff. He didn't have any personality issues. So he's a pretty popular player. He's made the Hall of Fame. But in addition to this being an update card, this is also a Tiffany card, which is a high gloss finish card, which are way more rare than the regular base set. So we have the base set, but this one's an update, and it's a Tiffany. So because Greg Maddox is a popular player and has made the Hall of Fame, that means that the demand for his card is fairly high because he's a fairly popular player. And a lot of people might say he's maybe more popular than Ozzie Smith. I don't know. But the key thing on this one is the supply is so much lower for the update traded set and extremely lower for the Tiffany cards. So the supply of a junk wax card, this is not a typical junk wax supply. This is a much lower supply. So what we've got is a much lower supply. We have a pretty high demand. And then people also want the pretty looking Tiffany card. And they want a Greg Maddox rookie card. So we have an increased demand because he's popular, he's well liked, he's in the Hall of Fame. And you have a much lower supply because it's a Tiffany and an update. So because this one has a double move, it has a lower supply and a higher demand, the equilibrium price is much higher than the base cards like the Ozzie Smith. So it's substantially higher in value. It's also got a higher demand because it's a rookie card. And the Ozzie Smith isn't. So there's a lot going for it. So if you want a junk wax card that's going to have some value, the Tiffany cards, the update cards, the O-Pee-Chee cards, those are the ones that will have some value. So what happens when a vintage player makes the Hall of Fame? So not that long ago, Minnie Minoso made the Hall of Fame. Now if you look here, again, we have a demand curve, we have a supply curve, just like we had with the Yogi Berra. This particular card sold for about $52, and it's ungraded. So we have the supply where it meets the demand, right? And so, a few years ago, say 10 years ago, Minnie Minoso, this card might have sold for, say, $20. Again, this is the equilibrium point, and this is the price that it was selling for. But he makes the Hall of Fame, and a few things happen. A lot of people like to collect Hall of Famers, so the demand goes up. Another thing that happens is he's in the news. You're hearing about him. You're hearing about all of his accolades. You're hearing about how good he was. You're hearing about the good things he did for the game. So because there's more notoriety, He's now a Hall of Famer. More people are interested in a Mini Minoso card. So the demand goes up. Because the demand goes up, because more people want to collect Hall of Famers, more people know about him because of all the news about him, because he makes the Hall of Fame. The demand goes up, the demand goes up. That means the equilibrium point is higher, which means the price is higher. So here's a question. Why do cards go up when they're graded? It's the same card. Why is a card going up in value when it's graded if it's the same card in the same condition? So we have another Mini Minoso. This one's a little bit nicer, not a ton nicer, but it's sold for $320. Why would that be? Why would it sell for so much higher just because it's graded? Well, there's a few things that are going on. Number one, especially if it gets a high grade, which this one's a 6, which is a pretty high grade for a 53 card. So we have our demand curve, we have our supply curve, just like, you know, that Yogi Berra we were looking at originally, and we have the equilibrium point. So we have what the card sold for. Well, as soon as it gets graded, the demand usually goes up. It goes up because people want graded cards. Why do they want graded cards? They want graded cards because it's already been established the condition that it's in. But the other part about it is when it's graded, people are more willing to buy it online. People are more willing to buy it on eBay or another auction site because you can't really tell how nice a card is just with a picture. But if it's been graded, you have some sort of assurance of how nice it is. So it expands the number of people who are willing to buy it, so the demand for it goes up. So more people from across the country or even the world are interested in buying the card because it's graded, because it's been established, you know pretty much what you're getting. There aren't going to be any crazy surprises like it would be if it was a raw card. So the demand is higher for a graded card. The other thing is if it's in a higher grade, like a 6 for 1953 Topps, there aren't a lot of 6s of Mini Minoso in a PSA holder. So the supply is lower. Now, there are a lot of pretty decent looking ones that are raw. There aren't a lot of 6s. So there is a lower supply of 6s than there are just raw ones out there, ungraded. The demand is higher because more people are willing to purchase it without physically seeing it. And some people even get a little nervous buying an ungraded card when they are in person because, heck, maybe you're not seeing something. Maybe you're not catching something. Maybe the lighting's bad. But the equilibrium point is way higher of a graded card because more people are interested in it and willing to buy it, because the supply of the higher grade is so much lower and there aren't a lot of them to try to get. So as a result, the equilibrium point is higher. The price is higher. I mean, the raw one we just looked at wasn't quite as nice as this, but it wasn't that bad. So how did it go from $55 to $320? Well, it got graded and it got a good grade. More people are willing to buy it, take the risk to buy it without being in the room. And there aren't a lot of them out there. So if you want a nice one, you got to get one when they come up. And that results in an increase in the price. So, next question. Why do cards go down in value when something bad happens? What do you mean something bad happens? Well, Fernando Tatis Jr. had something bad happen. Look at that chart down there. A year and a half ago, this card was selling for $200. It just sold for $5. So he tests positive. And when he tests positive, a whole bunch of things change. Maybe now he doesn't have a chance of getting into the Hall of Fame if he was on that track, right? Because so far, those that have tested positive haven't gotten into the Hall of Fame. You wonder, is he as good as we thought he was, or was he just good because he was on something? People don't know, so you don't know what to believe. So we had the demand curve and the supply curve before he tested positive for the card for whatever price that was selling at. It looks like for a while it was about $200, and then it went down to about $100. And so the price at which it was selling for was where that demand curve and that supply curve connected, right, for our equilibrium point, and that gives us the price that it sold for. So we had the price that it was selling for, but then the bad news happens. And a lot of people are like, I don't know if I want a Tatis card, because what if he was only good because he was on something? Is he going to make the Hall of Fame or continue being a good player? I don't know, because he was on something. So less people want the card. So the demand goes down to the left. Because it goes down, there's a decrease in value. Now, you're probably not going to have bad news come out about Ernie Banks or about Yogi Berra. If you're retired, if you're deceased, there's probably not going to be a lot of new information about you. But current players are a little bit riskier. So why are vintage cards of Hall of Fame players so expensive? Because they seem to be the gold standard. They seem to be stable, and they seem to just continue to go up and up and up in value. So why? So here's a Ty Cobb T206, which sold recently for about $3,800. Now that's a lot of money for a card. And this one was, what's that, a 1.5 with a mark. So you have that supply and demand curve where they intersected, right? Well, the reason the price is so high compared to other cards is there are not a lot of T206s out there. A lot of the T206s, there have been less than 1,000 or 1,500 graded at all. So there's a very low supply of old cards. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of 1987 Topps Ozzie Smith cards. There are about maybe 1,000 or 2,000 of the red background portrait Ty Cobb cards. So they have a very low supply. And a lot of people want them. It's Ty Cobb. It's one of the best players who ever lived. So there's a lot of demand for one of the best players who ever lived. There's a lot of demand for a really cool looking card that's over 100 years old. So there's a huge demand for Ty Cobb cards. There's a huge demand for a card that's over 100 years old. And there aren't many of them out there. So where those cross the equilibrium point, the price is really, really high. And guess what? Ty Cobb has, some personality issues, but nothing that we don't already know. So you're not going to suddenly find out, oh, Ty Cobb this weekend went out drinking and got himself in trouble. But John Morant did. And John Morant's cards are, uh-oh, what's happening? So one of the things that makes vintage cards stable is you're not going to find out anything crazy about the player. And the supply is so low. So what are the key takeaways here? If there's a huge supply of cards, the price will never be that high. That Ozzie Smith 1987 Topps card, unless people just start throwing those away like crazy, unless thousands of those just disappear, there's never going to be that much value there. There's just too many 1987 Topps Ozzie Smith cards. They're everywhere. So that's one of the biggest obstacles. Now, a way to increase the price for a card, so if you have a card and you want to increase its value, you could increase the demand for it by getting it graded. If it's a high quality, high grade card, You could reduce the supply by getting it graded in a high grade that there aren't a lot of, instead of it being in a raw grade, which there are a lot of. And you could increase the demand because more people are willing to buy it because it's graded, so it's more of a known quantity of what you'd be getting. It's less of a risk to buy a card that you're not actually looking at physically. Again, a picture is a 2D item, but a card is a 3D item. It's hard to really get a good look at it just from a picture. Negative news about a player will drop their prices, but retired and dead players probably aren't going to have a lot of new bad news. One of the reasons modern cards are so unstable and go way up and then way down and then way up and then way down is we're still learning about them. We're still finding out information about them. Buying rare cards in a rare condition of a beloved player is the best way to have a card that has value and will continue to go up in value. There aren't a lot of them. A lot of people want them. And you're not going to have much bad news about the person. It kind of has everything. There could still be bad news about a current player. Good news about a player like making the Hall of Fame or winning a Super Bowl or chasing a record like Aaron Judge last year will increase the demand. Patrick Mahomes winning another Super Bowl increases the demand. But how long will that increased demand last? We do not know. We do not know if it's for a month, for a year, for 10 years. Part of it depends on what happens from here. If there's a major injury to Patrick Mahomes, those cards aren't going to be worth anything what they're worth now. Especially since there are tons of them out there. The stable bet, the best bet, the safest bet is vintage Hall of Famers, low supply, high quality. Because you have everything. You have the high demand and the low supply. I could talk about this stuff all day, and some of you are saying, I think you just did. Because I went on, but I wanted to give a real thorough explanation to everyone about the economics of sports cards. How supply and demand works as it relates to cards, because the better we understand what is happening with supply and demand, the better we can predict what the value of a card is and will move to. Modern cards are risky. There's lots of them. And bad news and bad things can still happen. There are not a lot of vintage cards. Someday, the 87 Topps Ozzie Smith is still going to have thousands and thousands and thousands of them, even when it's 80 years old. Being old doesn't make it valuable. A low supply does. So if they start getting thrown out, yeah, it might be worth something. Will they be thrown out? Probably not. At least, probably not enough of them, because the supply is through the roof. If you like the junk wax era cards, go for the Tiffany's, the O-Peaches, the high grades, the update series. Because 88 Topps Don Mattingly ain't worth much.